So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the HOSR 50 Years Story Hour. My name is Jennifer Wesson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Head of the Schuylkill Regatta, and on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Committee 50, we welcome you to our 10th Story Hour. We're excited to welcome you to a conversation celebrating Title IX, its impact, the success and failures in implementation over the years, and the work that needs to be done today to better support opportunities for women in the future. We will hear from coaches, administrators, and women who have experienced Title IX for different perspectives throughout the past 50 years. If you are new to our story hours and want to learn more or view past story hours, you can go to www.hosr.org or visit the YouTube page, the HOSR YouTube page. With your feedback and support, we continue to grow the topics and community, and we hope that these conversations and storytelling will take us long into the future. We want this stellar lineup to do most of the talking tonight, and I'm getting over a massive head cold, so I'm not going to take up too much time with introduction. However, I do want to review just a few housekeeping items so we can help with the sound and the flow of things this evening. We are on Zoom, so the format can be a little tricky with a large group, but we continue to use this platform because we feel it's really important to see one another and your reactions and your laughter and your smiles. The storytellers are not only sharing with us, but we are sharing with them the recognition and appreciation for their contributions and successes in our community. So I've muted everyone to eliminate any background noise, but you have the ability to unmute at any time. Please be reminded that when you do, any kind of background noise will prevent others from being able to hear the speaker. So just be cognizant of that. Be sure to put your screen on gallery view. So if you're seeing me right now, very large, you can scroll up to the upper right-hand part of your screen and you'll see an option, and you can switch over to gallery view where you can see lots of attendees at one time. And then I encourage you to keep your chat room visible off to the side. That's on the bottom bar. You can click on the chat room and feel free to add comments or questions, and I will monitor that as the evening goes along. In addition, I just wanted everyone to be aware that I am recording this session, so it is available for those that are unable to join us tonight, and so that you can share this very important topic with teammates and colleagues and family and friends. So we'll probably go to about 8:15 maybe. I'll turn it over to Jim Dietz, and he'll facilitate the evening and pose questions to our storytellers. We'll reserve like the last 15-20 minutes for the entire audience to pose questions and to add in thoughts. But again, you're welcome to raise your hand or jump in at any point in time. This is a very casual atmosphere, and we want to hear from as many folks as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim to introduce our storytellers and facilitate the evening. So enjoy, everyone.
All right. Well, we've got a great group of storytellers here tonight, and pretty much everybody on the panel that's going to be speaking tonight.
Hey, Jim, you're muted.
That's better. I'm always better.
That's okay.
As a coaching friend of mine said, the brain is an incredible thing. It only stops working when somebody gives you a microphone. That's why I was probably muted. All right. What I was saying is we've got a great panel here tonight. Pretty much everybody here was there at the beginning when Title IX was initiated. I know that Wendy was born the year Title IX was initiated, and she'll be on here. But other senior members on the call, Joanne Iverson, Joan Scholes, all these people were there at the beginning when Title IX started to come into being. For those younger people on the call that might not know exactly what Title IX was, Title IX was set up by the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. It was initiated as Title IX, which protects people from discrimination based on sex of all educational programs, that's academic and athletics, that receive federal funding and assistance. All right. This is basically every high school and college in the United States, because every high school and college in the United States receive some sort of federal assistance. So this was the beginning. I first became aware of Title IX when I moved to Philadelphia in 1973 to train for the national team. Chuck Colgan back then worked for the Philadelphia School Board. He hired myself and Bob Jockstetter that went on to coach the Cox, the 84 Olympic 8, to work in the Title IX offices where we were obtaining data, calibrating that data, trying to put it together for future reference. Unfortunately, I did not think about Title IX again, or did not read about it until 1996, when I was asked to coach the University of Massachusetts women's team. So basically, for the first 25 years, Title IX, after it was put into practice, was dormant. It wasn't doing anything. And one of the reasons for that, even after Title IX began, was because of a simple clause where an institution can show continuing practice of program expansion. So that means a university could come into compliance if it started a team, maybe it gave the team a scholarship that year, maybe a year or two later gave them another scholarship or something else, and they were able to drag their feet along for quite a while until we got things going. You know, the simplicity of the portionality of Title IX is, if there's 48% men in an institution, that institution has to put 48% of the funds towards men. If there are 52% women in an institution, 52% of the funds will go towards women. But the athletic departments really weren't forthcoming as to what the different programs were entitled to. And from a rowing standpoint, we were just happy to have jobs and be able to try to promote our sport and move it along. In its simplest form, if there was a men's basketball team, there was going to be a women's basketball team. If there was a men's baseball team, there's going to be a women's softball team. But what happens when you have a men's football team? Well, fortunately for rowing, that was women's rowing. All right. And the athletic directors quickly picked that up. I want to throw Wendy in here now. Wendy, unmute yourself, because Wendy was there when her program at UMass was first a club and then became varsity. And then over the course of her career, aside from winning world championships and making Olympic teams and whatever, she was on probably one of the most well-financed programs in the country at the University of Texas. So Wendy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like at the beginning?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to talk about Title IX because I feel like it is something that I guess changed the course of my life, which I know that's a really strong statement, but that's how I feel about it. So I feel very strongly about, Title IX and support of Title IX. So yeah, I started rowing at the University of Massachusetts, 92, 93, when it was a club program. I was a dues paying member of the club for 92, 93 year, and then 93, 94 year. During the summer of 94, I was rowing at Thames River Sculls for Jim Dietz when he called me up, and I was living in Mystic, Connecticut at the time, and he lived in New London. And he called and said, "I've been offered the head coach women's position at UMass. Come over to my house and convince me to go there." So I drove 90 miles an hour over the bridge from Mystic to New London and got to his house. And on the way, I was thinking about all the things like, school systems for his kids and all this stuff, and how great Amherst is. Antonio's Pizza. I was throwing in everything that I thought would lure him there.
That's what got me there. Antonio's Pizza.
And I got to the end of my spiel with Jim and Pam, and Jim said, yeah, I'd already decided to go there. I just wanted to hear what you'd say. So, so anyway, Jim came in 94, 95, and I rode for him my second senior year at that point, because 92, 93 was my novice year and I was a junior. So I had rode my junior and senior years for the club program. Jim came in and offered me a scholarship to row a second senior year. So I did that. And then I graduated in 95 from my undergrad with 2 undergraduate degrees, because my second senior year, I had enough credits to turn one of my minors into its own degree. So 2 undergraduate degrees, and then I accepted a graduate assistantship that Jim offered me to go to grad school. So I started coaching the fall of 1995. And then in January of 1996, the NCAA came in and wrote rules regarding women's rowing, which made me eligible again. They basically said, if you're a member of a club program that went varsity, your years in the club program didn't count towards your eligibility. So my second senior year was considered my first year of eligibility. So I was able to row for 2 years through grad school. And I still had 1 year left of eligibility when I graduated in 1997 with 2 undergraduate degrees and a master's. So
overeducated. That's what's wrong with the school system today.
Yeah. So I tell people that I'm really smart on paper. So, yeah.
But Wendy, touch briefly on what it was like to be in a club program where you using hand-me-down boats, and then finishing up at the University of Texas.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, my novice year, we were rowing in a show and broad, which is partly wooden and very heavy. Amanda Krause and I were actually teammates that novice year when we were rowing in, I think the boat was called the Room 9, which was this dirty cellar of a room underneath the swimming pool in Topman Gym at UMass. And it was very heavy and very old. And then I think Jim did a really good job working with Vespoli, getting us some new boats. That was awesome. When I went to Texas, Dave O'Neill did a really good job the first years he was there, working a deal with Pocock. So we rode Pococks for a while there before he switched, I think, to a Hudson the year that I took the job working for US Rowing. And since then, I believe there's an Empaka or 2 in the Boathouse. So he's not married to any one boat maker at the moment. I think he's just looking for whatever he thinks is going to bring the best speed to the crew he has. And I think fortunately for that program, the University of Texas was really supportive of the team. And I would say, especially when they started doing really well. Right. There were definitely moments when, early on when there was a little bit more pushback than later on once the team started performing. And I think Dave O'Neill will tell you the same thing, that, the administration is, much more supportive of a team that shows that, they can be national champions like they were last year.
To give people an idea of our growth, all right? The very first year the NCAA had a championship was 1997. That year, there were only a combined 47 Division 1, 2, and 3 women's rowing programs in the country. Therefore, the size of the NCAA championship which is based on a matrix of the number of teams supporting varsity programs, had a championship which was comprised of 6 Division 1 teams, 3 Division 2 teams, and 3 Division 3 teams. all in the same event. All right. Fast forward 25 years later, there are 88 Division I women's rowing programs comprising a championship of 22 teams, 16 Division II programs comprising a championship of 6 teams, of an 8 and a 4, and 43 Division III teams comprising a championship of 8 teams with 2 8s each. The Division I has 2 8s and a 4. So we've grown exponentially over the years. Another one of the successes of that is what has happened on the junior level, because for every one of those teams, there are probably 5 high school or juniors teams that have started congratulate Steve on winning the Patriot League championships and the championship 8 this year. All right, Steve, can you unmute there?
Hi, Jim.
Hi,
You
Steve.
actually-
Thanks for making it, Steve. The in the league doesn't get you to the NCAA championship. As a Division I team, you have to have total points of 2 8s and a 4 in order to get to the championship. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think things changed. I forget what year it was, where the automatic qualifier became part of the process. And again, that's based on every conference. I think there's 11 conferences that are eligible. And so when you go to the NCAA, you have 11 teams that qualified directly through their conference. So whether it's the Big 10, Big 12, Ivy, Patriot, MAC, A10, AAC, you name it, there's 11 different conferences that are qualifying directly. Beyond those 11, you have 11 selected crews. And so you've got to show your speed over the course of the year to be comparable to those 11 crews.
I think you froze. Can anybody else hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi,
Steve,
Jen.
I think we lost you for a minute.
Hey, I lost Jim. Wendy, did you lose me at all?
Yeah, I lost you when you started to talk about the automatic qualifiers.
Yeah. So I think we're losing you more than anything else. So I think everyone was hearing just the ideas of, the AQ came into play, and the beauty of the automatic qualifier, the beauty of conferences being rewarded for having rowing as part of their conference championships is that you had more investment in the sport. And when the AQ came about, you had more conferences saying that rowing was important to them and having a conference championship. And as a result, you had universities that believed they had a shot to win the conference, whereas before they might not have had a shot to go to the NCAA. And so I think the AQ was an important part of the growth of the sport because it spurred investment. It encouraged investment. And when we think about the fact that we've been in this 80 to 90 range of schools for a good 10 years now, one of the big questions that we always talk about, and Jim is a big proponent of this, is how do we keep going? How do we not stay stagnant in this 80 to 90 range of Division I programs, let alone Division II and Division III? And how do we create a situation where there is more investment from more universities? Obviously, there's some restrictions when it comes to you got to have a place to row. But other than that, there's lots of places that still could have rowing that don't. And I think all of us that are vested in the sport and want to see it continue to grow would love to see, 150 Division I programs and maybe even a larger championship. But yeah, that's sort of the road of the AQ, and I think it's part of the history of the sport, and it'll lead to something else. In a team like ours, we were fortunate to win our conference a number of years before the AQ came into play, And I was definitely a lobbyist for the AQ. And then as soon as the AQ came into play, we haven't won it since. This year, we made a nice move and
Yeah.
our varsity won the championship. But again, that doesn't bring our team to the championship. But to me, it's all positive.
So Steve, for me, that begs the question. We've grown to this point where we have a tremendous amount of interest. I mean, and if I'm looking at my stats correctly from when I was on the NCAA committee almost 8 years ago now, we've actually dropped from 98 Division I teams to 88. All right, so we've lost teams there. I believe there was something like 20-something Division II teams. Now we're down to 16, and I think there were 47 Division III teams. Carol might know better, and now we're down to 43. All right, and finances are getting to be a big part of the equation as to the growth of our sport. All right, one of the things that I've thrown out there, Steve and I have talked about this many times in the past. I know I spoke to it with Jen and some of the other coaches, is why is rowing the only Olympic sport that the NCAA sponsors that doesn't follow the Olympic format? Gymnastics has all the gymnastics events. Track and field has all the track and field events. Swimming has all the swimming events. Rowing just has 8s and 4s. All right. And, you know, part of the point of discussion, and this is where I'd like to bring Jen Sanford in. Jen's on a new committee, part of the CRCA, the Collegiate Rowing Coaches Association, the Sustainability Committee. And I think that's an interesting question, where we can go in the future, how we can think out of the box to continue to have this growth. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier on was rowing became this big NCAA sport because of football. We fill the void for football. What happens if football leaves the NCAA? What happens to rowing at that point? And we have to start to think about the future as to how we can sustain that. So Jen, I'd like you to jump in here now and tell us a little bit about the Sustainability Committee and tell us a little bit about how you survived the latest lawsuit.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So yes, I've been at UConn for 25 years, and we were cut in May of 2020. And then 12 student athletes filed a lawsuit against the university, and we were given a temporary restraining order in May of 21 because when we were cut, we were given 1 more year to compete. And then the final settlement happened just this past December. So, you know, I've learned, you know, I said before the call started, I didn't really know much at all about Title IX. And now I'm certainly not an expert, but I know a lot more than I did before the team was cut and then reinstated. So part of this process, the CRCA, the Collegiate Rowing Coaches Association, started a sustainability committee as there were teams being cut across the country, right, kind of pandemic related. And I wasn't on the committee from the beginning, but eventually joined. And we've worked on multiple things, and there's probably, I want to say there's maybe 9 people on the committee. Most are currently coaching, and then there's a few that are past, you know, we're past collegiate coaches. But what we're working on now is using Title IX to approach universities that don't sponsor women's rowing, and trying to find a way to encourage them in a non-threatening way to add the sport. You know, in Title IX, Jim talked at the beginning of the call about, you know, just numbers and percentages of participation. So participation is one part of Title IX, and there's EADA numbers are posted, are required to be public information. And so as we as a committee look at this public information, we can see, you know, how some schools are really off with their numbers. And a lot of times the numbers aren't even accurate. And so, you know, we're in the process right now of just trying to, you know, put a presentation together and start approaching schools to grow the sport. Jim, to your point about the conversation you and I had about the Olympic, you know, why are we not doing the Olympic events? That isn't something that we've tackled yet on the CRCA, but certainly something that's, interesting. Like you said, if they drop football, that's going to be a very interesting thing.
Speaking of dropping stuff, I want to drop my video here because that might give me a better signal. So if you don't see me, I'm still around. But one of the things that could be attractive with that scenario, Jen, of moving to the small boats is you wouldn't need to have a $2 million budget. You wouldn't need to be carrying massive amount of people on your roster, right? A small program with a good coach producing great singles, doubles, pairs, quads, could be very successful. And you would see then the Cinderella story in rowing that you've never seen to date. All right. But you saw it in basketball this year with St. Peter's, and how they were able to come out of no place and be successful. So I think that might be attractive to fledgling programs that want to get into rowing without having that big
Can I
paycheck.
ask a question?
Sure.
This whole NCAA thing is new to me, but you mentioned only 2 events. Are they men's rowing events only?
Joan, did you say, are they women's events only?
No, men's only.
No, the NCAA is just for women's rowing.
Okay, so
right. And in women's rowing, whether you're in Division 1, 2, or 3, all you're racing in are 8s and 4s. So there are no other small boats.
Okay.
Yeah.
I go back too far so that this was not part of my world.
Right.
So
one of the things that I'd like to throw out here to the coaches is, a lot of people don't understand. They think, okay, they're supporting a rowing team. How are they supporting the rowing team? All right, here are some of the things that the athletic departments and the senior women's administrators like Carol, who we're going to get to next, are involved with. All right, equity in equipment and supplies, scheduling of games and practice times, travel, per diem, allowances, opportunities for coaching and compensations for coaching, academic tutoring, locker rooms, facilities, medical and training services, housing and dining services, publicity, recruiting, scholarship. I mean, those are all things that are part of a women's program now. Speaking of locker rooms, I see Ann Boucher on the call. And Ann, besides, you can smile, Ann. Besides being a Yale oarsman, who I think was part of the crew that walked in naked, I think, her claim to fame is that she rows with Charlie Haight. So, Ann, you want to hop in here and tell us what it's like?
That is my claim to fame. Actually, I was a senior in high school when the protest occurred, and the acceptance letters had not come out yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was March, and most of you probably know the story. The women from the rowing team went into the office of the women's athletic director and took off their sweats where they had written Title IX across their chests and read a statement saying these are the bodies that you're, abusing, basically, because we have to sit freezing in the bus at the boathouse waiting for the men to take showers and put on dry clothes so that we can all drive back into, New Haven together to get dinner. Yet we are sitting in our soaking wet sweats. So anyway, that was the protest that, by the time I got there the next fall, we had our locker room and showers, and it moved very quickly, very, very quickly.
Well, rowing has benefited, by Title IX and stuff like that. But the universities have benefited also by having our programs there. I want to get back to Steve because Steve, I pulled up your website and there was a link where you could click on and it said, is Bucknell women's rowing successful? And the reply was, yes, they have the top GPA of all 27 sports in school. I think that's pretty much indicative of all the rowing programs out there, how smart the kids are.
Absolutely. You've got a high performing group of students because of the sport. because of the nature of the sport, because of the discipline that it requires, and honestly, part and parcel because of the humility that it builds, in the sense that we're not a flashy sport. We're not the TV sport. We don't have a high score. We don't have the flashiest facility on campus. I think it builds the kind of kids that we want to put out there as models for our universities. Hey, Jim, I was raising my hand before because I had a question. I was wondering if this happens with football, and football is no longer, the numbers issue, doesn't create the numbers issue. Do you see rowing programs being halved as far as how large their rosters are? And then as a result of that, would you possibly see the Olympic format being more likely? Because instead of having an average team size of 55, which is the US average right now, you might end up with an average team size of now 25 because departments aren't going to support it at that level anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a result of that, perhaps the NCAA would reimagine the 2/8 and the 4, which honestly was not created by design. It wasn't like the NCAA came in and said, what's the best version? In fact, the first version was not 2/8 and a 4. It was at large boats and all those events. And the 2/8 and the 4 team was just a happenstance that has stuck now for maybe 15 or 20 years. And we got to be careful that we don't just stick with it for another 15 or 20 years. Because again, it wasn't a designed plan.
In that history, Steve, the AQ was brought in by Barbara Chesler from Yale, who's the women's administrator there, and the Ivy Group. They pushed that. And it was probably the right thing to push at the time because all universities had were 8s and 4s. I think we've progressed from them. The other pushback that we got at the beginning, when it was an individual team sport and you would have smaller teams qualifying, and you only have to look at junior rowing in the United States to see how successful that is. The bigger programs are rowing the bigger boats. Successful programs are coming along with scullers from all over the country. But there's where you could move towards the future and probably get more growth again to move away from the AQ. One of the things at the beginning was, well, if we had AQ, we're going to have regional qualifiers. Well, with the numbers of programs that I just listed in our growth, it's quite easy to have regional qualifiers. I had this discussion with Amanda Krause from US Rowing just today, and her comment was US Rowing would love to be able to put on regional championships for stuff. So there is the potential if people start thinking out of the box to change the championship up and probably have some more growth. Jen, I think you might want to chime in on what Steve was talking about as far as the number of women on the roster. You just went through that, right?
Yeah, no, and that's a really interesting topic right now because depending on the conference that you're in, so at UConn, the lawsuit was primarily based on the Title IX component of participation numbers. So we went from being required to have 60 people on the team as of the first date of competition. Now we're down to 45. And why 45 works for us now is, we're now in the Colonial Athletic Association conference. And so when you look at the championship, there's a varsity 8, a second varsity 8, and a varsity 4, which score points. It models the NCAA. And then they have a third varsity 8 event. However, that event doesn't score points. Prior to that, we were in the American Athletic Conference where there were actually 6 events. And, so each conference has a different number of events. Some of the bigger conferences, that have 90 to 100 women on the team, at their conference championship, they're having maybe, 8 events. So they're having more people participate in the conference championship to try to win the conference championship to have the opportunity to go to NCAAs. The argument can be, why do you need that many people if you're only, if the championship only consists of 2/8 and a 4? So that's a big part of the argument. And it is, there are different philosophies about it. It was hard for me at first to grasp having less people and for us at the University of Connecticut, it's a good number. You know, we have a small boathouse, and part of the lawsuit settlement was to upgrade the boathouse, but an upgrade is not going to really produce more racks for us. You know, so it's a small space, and that number, if our goal is to win the conference championship so that we can go to NCAAs, you know, 45 is a good number. So, but there's definitely, you know, on the opposite side, the teams that are fielding very high numbers of people, you know, they don't want to be told that they're going to drop their numbers, you know, and so it's very, there's a very wide range of opinions about it. And I know
I'd like to jump in really quickly just to along that same note. I know with the University of Texas, there is a number that the administration gives to the rowing team in the fall that says, this is the number that we want you to hit in terms of, you know, number of athletes on the team on X date in September or early October. And then in the spring, they basically have a different maximum that you can be at. So, you know, it's in the 80s or 90s, sometimes high 90s in the fall. And by the spring, they want you to be at, you know, 48 or whatever number it is.
And Wendy, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Is that recruited athletes as well as novice walk-ons?
It's everyone.
Okay.
So they include everyone, including the walk-ons for that number in the fall, just so they can meet the mark. And then they say, oh, no, we don't actually want to support that number. So it feels a little bit like you're getting used because, you know, they just hit it to hit the number. And then they say, oh, no, we didn't really mean it. And I think that's a little painful.
Well, and that's something that's coming out. So part of our settlement is we have 2 Title IX monitors that are auditing, doing a Title IX review of the athletic department, and that is coming up. And I think that's something as rowing coaches, we've always kind of felt that way, you know, like it doesn't, you know. So, and I remember my early days, they would count at UConn if people showed up to the meeting, the walk-on meeting, and filled out the form. There was one year that it said we had like 92 people on the roster, and I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know, you know, and so they had a guy come in the next year who was doing a Title IX, you know, yearly review, and he's, what happened? You only have 62 on the roster. Last year you had 90. I said, what are you talking about? I never had 90 people. And they went back and looked, and it was any person who showed up to that meeting was counted. Now they would never do that today, you know, so This is going back probably between 20 and 25 years ago. So, you know, at the end of when our Title IX review is done, and we just met with one of the monitors last week, she said, you know, the University of Connecticut will probably be the most compliant university in the country related to Title IX because we've had to go through this process, you know, and UConn isn't doing anything different or than any other school that has Division I football, but they happen to get caught because they chose to cut a women's team who chose to fight back. And that's
I think Wisconsin also got caught at one point with all of their numbers. I want to get Carol on here. Carol, besides being a multi-time world champion, Olympic champion, and great coach, and congratulations on your Dadville win this past weekend.
Thank you.
You are also an SWA, and that is a senior women's administrator, which is huge. All right. And, you know, my question to you is, all right, a lot of times, as I said earlier, you know, these programs are started up as coaches. We're just so happy to have a sport. We're so happy to have a job. We're not thinking about how much we're getting paid or anything else. You know, we're just thinking about, wow, this is great. But now we're to the point where we want to continue to grow the sport. All right. And the concept that Jen and I and Steve have talked about in the past, going to the Olympic events, or another concept, becoming a 2-season sport. All right. rowing already is a 2-season sport in that you have your fall season and your spring season. You could think out of the box and say, okay, in the fall season, we're going to row singles, doubles, and pairs over a 5K distance, right? But the coaches are so busy at the smaller programs, just keeping their kids healthy, keeping the kids safely in boats, keeping the engines running on the boats, that sometimes they don't think. From an SWA standpoint, if you were talking, and I know you're Division III, it's a little different, but you have been at both Yale and Penn, so you're going to get it. If a university is funding one of our teams, the athletic directors are certainly looking for results. How do they judge those results? They judge those results through the NCAA. That's the yardstick, all right? But if you look at Division I, probably 60 of the 88 teams, Division I, have never been to the NCAAs and probably never will get there. 16 of those teams that are currently going have been there every year. If you were an SWA and you were trying to change the format, wouldn't a female athletic director say, well, if we change the format, we might become players. If we're going to be supporting the team anyway, why don't we support the team in a way where we might have success getting to the NCAAs? What do you think of something like that?
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point in that we need more administrators of rowing in the colleges. We're very far behind in that. And I think I'm one of the few who actually, I think, mentioned the word senior, and I think that's what hit it. You know, the hardest thing for any rowing coach is to try to explain rowing to the administrator and what's going on with that. It's really nice when the administrator comes out and watches a little while. I know mine has, and it's even better when the president comes out of the college and watches rowing. It's even better when her son starts to row for a college, because now they're starting to connect more. It's not just statistics and that, it's a lifestyle, it's a story and everything else. So we just need.
Carol, let me just jump in here. If you stood up before a room full of senior administrators and you said, why doesn't rowing look like the Olympic sport that it is? The response would probably be, it doesn't.
Right.
Correct?
Right. And they would
say,
don't
know.
Right. That's it. They just don't know. I will say, Jim, that you would be very pleased at the Dad Vale Regatta.
It has been getting better.
The collegiate singles, the collegiate doubles, both men and women, were filled up. Great racing. You know, some not so great racing, but I think that's a place to start. Is to start to showcase it in some places. And I know some of the regattas are starting to do that. I think what you're talking about is going to start to feed in. And I know that there's a college program that started up, Gordon, and that's all they're doing. They're doing the small boats. That's how they're going to compete, because that's how they see their best advantage. So I think as new startups come, if they have the opportunity to race, that will be the way to do it. Because the way it works is you have to start to populate the idea. As soon as more programs are doing it, then more programs can start to compete against each other. And then that's how it gets noticed by athletic departments.
At the very first NCAAs that I went to, even the ones that I went to in the 2000s, all right, they wouldn't even allow you to have a spare pairs race because they were afraid of that event possibly taking off. You know, and that's kind of sad. You know, I mean, I really think that we could have another growth spurt in the sport, you know, for these smaller programs. And again, I said it before, if you point to the junior programs in the United States, right, there are small programs like Quad Cities and all these other little places that are producing incredible athletes. The bigger programs, the Marins, the Sarasotas, they're still winning the eights. But even if you went to the Olympic format, the big power broker schools, the BCS football schools, the Ivy Leagues with the deep pockets would probably still have the majority of the athletes filling those events. But the smaller program would have a shot. And in the current situation, the smaller program doesn't have a shot again.
Well, Jen, you're muted.
Sorry. Jim, don't you think though that it's the conference, the AQ has gotten to a point though that people are, for example, like to be, you know, in the CAA to say to a recruit, like we're trying to win the CAA, that's going to be our ticket to NCAAs. Do you think you would have enough people supporting your idea? I feel like the football thing has to happen and then everybody panics. And then your idea is the most brilliant idea ever created. But I think until the football thing happens, I think it's going to be really hard to get people to like support the idea that you have, because it's, you know, the big, like, as you said, it's 16 teams keep going every year. And there's a lot of people.
To answer your question, Jen, I think if I was talking to a high school student, I might pitch that line. Okay. But being in a college program from the Atlantic 10, right, which is similar to the Patriot League and your league, all right? Yes, you're making the NCAAs, but you're in the D final. How many of us have ever moved from the D final even to the C final, right? And that's because of resources. I mean, that's because of scholarships and boats and travel and everything else that draws a person into the program. So I don't think it was a reward for the women in those last years that I was getting to the NCAAs, going to the NCAAs, because they just thought, we're just going to go get beat up here. So, you know, and there again, the top 4 women in your program might be ready to win the NCAA championship, but they're not going to do it if they have to qualify in a 2-8s and a 4. You know, it's just not going to happen. So I don't see the equity. What I've seen over the last 25 years is we moved up to 22 women's teams at the NCAA Division I championship is a watered down NCAA championship. All right, because you can't tell me the people in the JV 8 and the 4 are better than some of the people in some of the other programs that have never, ever got there.
Yeah, it's just, it's a different philosophy, you know?
Well,
I think we have to look towards the future. Go ahead, Carol.
Well, I'm also been the commissioner for the Mid-Atlantic Rowing Conference up until last year. And before the pandemic, we had increased our numbers up to 12 varsity women's 8s, and getting 2 heats of JV 8s like that. We were really growing. We're adding teams, and we're a single sport conference, so it's not like we're locked into, you know, schools. So we're the conference that would accept boats that, you know, their conference wouldn't allow rowing. So
Right.
then the pandemic hit, and then they started cutting off those crews, and so we lost some crews. I think personally, the growth here is making sure that every program that we have is aware, like Jen's crews were aware, that if someone tries to cut you, that's going against historical progress towards Title IX. And that's what happened to Brown University that really exploded Title IX in the mid-90s. Is of all the Ivy Leagues, they had the most women's programs. But then they cut field hockey. Field hockey team got mad and sued. And so Brown became the sort of figurehead as to not, you know, holding up Title IX. And then they had, and then they became the major Title IX school. So, and that really woke up everybody around. So people realize that if you cut, you can't cut equally if things are not yet equal. And is that what happened to you guys? They did it based on, you know, because they cut you guys, they weren't showing progress towards equity? Jen?
Well, I mean, the reason that we were cut along with men's tennis and men's swimming and diving and men's cross country was, you know, just they claimed the financial due to, you know, budget issues and COVID, you know, and it was like, you know, we saw that happening across the country. So, you know, the lawsuit that we filed, the easiest way, you know, and someone mentioned earlier about all the different prongs of Title IX, but for us, it was just a very, you know, it was the easiest way to prove that they were not in compliance was through the numbers.
Right. Okay. So that was the numbers. But I think it's really important that everybody knows that you don't have to tolerate being cut. So, you know, and it should be the students who file the suit, not the
Correct.
employees of the institution. So
And that's what the sustainability committee has tried to get out to the CRCA, you know, or any teams that are feeling like they're going to be cut, or, you know, that, because when we got cut, I did feel like I was on an island. I had no idea what to do, but I was lucky enough to get connected with the woman, Felice Duffy, who ended up being our lawyer, and that, you know, but initially you have no idea what to do. And so I think that there is good messaging out there now. And I get calls from coaches now, you know, other rowing coaches from different institutions with questions. And so I think that there's a lot, I think we're a lot more educated now because of what's happened, which is good.
I think that's the point, and that's the point of this Zoom here. It's all about education, and you learn a lot from history. All right. I want to touch on some of the other points of Title IX that I think are great successes. Great successes of Title IX is the number of women coaching in the United States today, not only in our sport, but other sports. All right. The number of women, as Carol said, that are becoming administrators in the sport. There are professions in sports in the United States, thanks to Title IX and everything it's done across the board, not only from rowing, but all the sports. And the growth has been incredible. And, you know, starting off, in 1996, if I went up to the top floor of the gym and I threw out a basketball, I'd see a bunch of women just falling over each other. And today, because of all the sports, you see so many more athletic women. I mean, they know what to do with it, and when you toss out a ball or do any other kind of sport, you know. So it's really been a boon to us, and I think, as the older group here, we have to keep it going. We have to start thinking out of the box as far as a little bit more than just what's best for my program, but what's best for rowing in general, and how to grow the sport into something that's really, really great. So I think, Jen, it's about time to start opening it up to questions.
Yes, anybody can chime in at this point in time or raise their hand and unmute themselves and ask questions.
Feaster.
Tom. You have to unmute yourself, Tom.
Unmute, Tom.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, take your
Okay.
hat off. We want to see the all beautiful.
Okay, yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Jimmy and I go back a long way. 1965. So we've been in contact with each other over the years, and I think the latest conversations we've had, and I want to plug them in here a little bit, because I think Jim's conversations is related to expanding this whole thing to sculling. Not the whole thing to sculling, but to have a lot more sculling events, singles, doubles, quads, and so on. He's absolutely correct. At the junior level with small programs, we happen to have here at the Stewards Foundation a pretty small program this year, and this year they exclusively did sculling, no sweep rowing at all. But I think the most important thing is that coastal rowing is going to be an Olympic sport within the next 8 years.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all sculling. Right now, it's singles, doubles, quads, both on the men's side and the women's side. So I think the lead on this thing was we're looking to the future, and looking to the future, that's going to be part of our future. I mean, we all know right now that rowing and the Olympics in general is changing considerably with all these events like Red Bull events that you would think of, and things like that. And I mean, even in LA, I think the Olympics is 1,500 meters. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, which is a total change to what we've been doing. So we have to think outside the box. And And coastal rowing is part of that. I had an opportunity last year to coach a coastal crew in, well, 3 of them actually, in Portugal. And the mixed double event, which is a cool event, which is a man and a woman. You know, our kids had an opportunity to win a silver medal in that thing. And I think that you're going to see coastal rowing be more and more visible in the United States and not just left to the foreign countries.
Yeah. That's a good point. You know, in the beginning when Title IX started, all right, the coaches all sat around and it's like, well, we can't row small boats because we live in Wisconsin and it's cold, you know, or, you know, we can't row small boats because we row here and it's rough. All right. Well, it's a big country. And again, if you look at junior rowing in the United States, you're seeing a variety of rowing clubs all around the country supporting the sport, right? Some are focusing on the big sweep boats, some are focusing on the small sculling boats. Now we're going to see, you know, programs focusing on coastal rowing, and it's all good. It's all rowing, all right? And it's going to enhance our image in this country through the NCAA and whatever. I encourage the coaches, Jen, on the sustainability committee, actually to sit down and talk with Amanda Krause from US Rowing. I was talking to Amanda today, and because we had discussed this on one of our calls earlier, and it's like, well, how does US Rowing and the NCAA interact? And as far as it goes, the NCAA gives the US Rowing $25,000 a year to help our judge referee call, which I know Joan Scholes is involved in, and some of the other judge referees here. To produce the judge referees, US Rowing supplies the rules of racing to the NCAA, you know, but as Steve said before, the NCAA wouldn't care if we showed up in dragon boats. They put on championships. It's the coaches and the Coaches Association and possibly Carol, the senior women's administrators. You know, I talked to Amanda about that. You know, is there an opportunity for the CEO of US Rowing to address the women's administrators at a sit down and talk to them about rowing and what rowing could be within their programs, you know, and, you know, that might be interesting.
Especially if you're talking to administrators that are trying to deal with women's sports and you're hearing it from a woman CEO of US Rowing. I think that would really have impact, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they would be anxious to put up a championship.
But Jimmy, going back, wouldn't you just say, I know when I first came into rowing, you know, you had the collegiate men rowing in eights. They weren't rowing in singles or doubles or anything like that. So I think the women's programs just sort of mimic the men's programs.
Well,
even before
you're absolutely right, and there's discussion on the men's side right now as to whether to become an NCAA sport or stay doing what they're doing, and I know there are coaches that are saying, well, the only thing our athletic directors understand is getting to the NCAAs. They don't care if you win the Grand Challenge Cup at Henley. You know, they understand that format, you know, and it's difficult for the men to go NCAA. They would have to step back in time like we did in 1997 and have a very small championship. They would be limited to going to Henley every year if they had the money to go to Henley every year, you know. And the reason that they would be limited to that small championship is because there are so few varsity men's rowing programs, Division 1, 2, and 3, to support a championship. They would have to see the growth that we would see. But possibly that growth, Carol, on the men's side could come quicker if they were offering all the Olympic events, because then it wouldn't be the price tag that it would be to create a program where you're buying all these eights and whatever. And, you know, you look at men's rowing today and it's like, half of the finalists at the Eastern Sprints last year were non-Americans. You know, it's like, let's do it here at home.
Well, I think the women are kind of doing that too.
Yeah, they are to some extent. Yeah.
Hey, Jim.
Hmm.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Rick Stellick.
Hi, Rick.
How you doing? I have a question. How do you, I know that women's rowing at the high school level, as we all know, has just exploded over the last few years. And fully at any of these regattas, like the Stotesbury and so forth, fully half or more of those participants are women.
Yes.
How can we leverage the college level? How can you leverage a tremendous support on the high school level amongst parents and clubs and coaches and so forth to convince these, from what I'm hearing from this discussion, convince the college, I guess, administrators that women's rowing at that level is huge? And why would it be more of a, why is it so difficult to convince them of its popularity, if you will, and advantages?
Good question, Rick. I had that conversation with Amanda Krause today, and I'll throw it back to Jen Sanford. Jen, would, if the Stokesbury Rowing Association, if the American Scholastic Rowing Associations, you know, came to the CRCA and say, hey, why don't you have sculling events? Would they listen?
I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like, you know, your idea of having them talk, like having US Rowing talk to the senior women's administrators. I know in our case, she would come back to me and say, okay, I was just given this information. What's your opinion? What do you think?
Sure.
And so I don't know.
But at least there's a dialogue there, and that's
right.
good.
No, and it has to start somewhere if that's what, you know, if that's what you're trying to accomplish. But I don't know, you know, and again, when you're talking about the CRCA, you know, it's, and these committees, it's like a small representation of the whole population. And, you know, I think we definitely, there was a survey that came out, Steve would know more about this, I think. There was a survey that came out maybe this fall or winter, you know, just asking the question of, might we think about adding a quad? And you know, I think the response was, Steve would know the response. Sorry to put you on the spot, Steve, but do you remember what I'm talking about when they put out to the membership about just a conversation of adding a quad and how that went? You're muted.
Unless there's something truly driving a change, that change isn't happening. So the AQ had a lot of people behind it driving that change. But to change the 4 into a quad, you know, it's just not going to have the critical mass to create change. There's got to be something else. I really think that I believe this football thing is going to happen. I think we're going to have a new, you know, footing that we're going to have to adjust to. And you're going to have universities that realize they don't need 65 and 95 on their roster for rowing. And they're going to maybe even cut some coaching positions, but they're going to look at the NCAA requirement of 25 people at the championship, and they'll say, okay, 35 sounds like that's the kind of sport we can keep. And I think when that happens, that's when we have an opportunity to reimagine rowing, because now if I'm a new program that doesn't have rowing, I'm not looking at adding a program that everyone else has 55 with. I'm looking at adding a program where other people have 15 and 20 and 25. But I still have a tough time connecting the dots to why universities these days are adding rowing with a 25-person minimum to go to the NCAAs. Now, Jen, I think the efforts you guys are making with making sure people are aware of how not to get cut and what to do in response to that, I think that's a huge thing that's grassroots within our sport that has to keep on happening. Another small, very small idea is when you think about how many of us have given a boat to a local junior program let alone oars. But there's tons of equipment that cycles out of our programs every year. But imagine if instead of giving it to juniors programs, we were thinking about growing the collegiate sport, and we were trying to target places that might have a shot of going from a club to a varsity team. And imagine if we had a small, inventory of all the boats that people are willing to give up this year, and cycle out of their boathouse and just keep on trying to feed those young programs that might become varsity someday. Or another thing similar to Jen, like I'm down in Myrtle Beach right now, and Coastal Carolina is this place that has a great body of water right next to it. And I'm sure we've all found those places where it's like, why doesn't Arizona State have a great rowing team?
Right.
What are we doing to perhaps instigate and maybe even support those club teams, because that could lead to another varsity team. And the more of those young teams that we get, maybe we have more critical mass to have the vote to change from 2/8 and the 4 to an 8, a quad, a 4, a pair, and a double, or whatever the first change is. Sorry to ramble there.
No, but
That
Steve,
there's a double-edged sword to that, Steve, and that's Title IX itself, because now you're looking at, well, if you're going to add a women's sport, you have to add a comparable men's sport. It's all a numbers game. So,
well, no, but the problem is, I mean, what we're trying to say is you need to add a women's sport because you're going to get in trouble eventually. Like that's what we're looking at on our committee. And so like, we're actually looking at institutions with their EADA numbers. We're looking at institutions who have currently a club team. And then we look at the EADA numbers to see, and then those are the types of places you want to approach, just to say like, you already have a club team in place. So we are like what you're saying, those things are actually happening a little bit, like within our committee to like researching exactly that. Like people on our call, they'll like look up different institutions, someone will say a college and they'll look it up. And then like, oh, where's the body of water near there? And oh, they already have a club team. And so it's good. I mean, I'm just saying it's positive because those conversations are happening. I do want to say though, I know we're going to wrap up soon. The NIL that's happening now, the name, image, and likeness. I think that there's going to be, that's going to blow up everything also, because now the money that donors have been giving to athletic departments to support operating budgets are now being given to an individual student so that they can go to the school. So if someone's giving $300,000 to an athletic program, now with the NIL, they're going to take that $300,000 and they're giving it to a specific student to get that student to go to the university. So I think in a couple of years, we're going to see even more of a major budget crisis, because the donors are now trying to get they're spending their money on,
I have to call you back shortly.
not on programs anymore. And that's just my prediction, watching all the chaos of that. And that's going to impact Title IX. It's going to impact everything also.
That absolutely, that, and Steve talks about, football leaving and the NCAA imploding. That's going to be a part of it, and, there again, with all of this open portal stuff now, where athletes can move from university to university without having to sit a year, it's all a money game. And unfortunately, in our lifetime, sports on the collegiate level has gone downhill, because now it's all about the almighty dollar, and it's not about creating, good scholar athletes. It's a much different situation. So, food for thought. We got to start thinking about this stuff to be able to keep our sports going.
And just if I can make a comment here, coming from Division III, and I'm at all women's college. I'm not worried about football and numbers or anything like that. It was just athlete interest, and they started the rowing program a number of years ago. And I was just thinking, the way I look at the Division I, II, and III, Division I now feels like they're training the way I training for the Olympic team. That's where Division I is now. Division III is kind of like what Division I used to be. So still everybody really loved to row. They really wanted to do it. They go out and do it. And so it's neat to see everything pull up in level and intensity and everything like that. But sometimes I can go overboard a little bit. So, and the overboard part is when, and it's the higher ups from the NCAA try to dictate to the rowing coaches and the rowing teams how things are going to run. And it really should be the other way around, which is tricky with the NCAA. So, but I will say D3.
You wonder, Carol, whether coaches felt better about the product that they produced before there was all this recruiting stuff. You know, where they just grabbed kids as they walked across campus, like we grabbed Wendy and said, we're going to make you a star, you know, and you make a star, you know, and today everybody's recruited, and, you know, I don't know if they really look too much to the walk-ons, but, you know, that was the big pitch when Title IX started. You know, you could grab somebody on campus and say, I'm going to make you an Olympian, you know, and how many coaches do that today? Good. We got any questions, Jen, or are we almost done?
I don't see any more questions popping up.
One.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that a little bit because, you know, the women that I've coached in high school over the past several years, I would say that every one of them has gotten a scholarship somewhere to a Division I school, and some of them weren't very good. And a lot of them, if they would have had an opportunity to go to a Division III school, would have rowed in races. And so many of these kids have not. They were the sparring partners for the super duper athletes on the Division I teams. And that really has kind of disappointed me a lot with the whole concept of this, because you know, the experiences that I had in college, you know, I'll never forget being able to actually row in races. And so I don't know what can be done about that, but I mean, I get it. And some of these athletes will not go to Division III school, even though they should, because there's not the scholarship money available based on that. So that's something to think about.
Yeah. Well, if we're gonna end here, I'd like to end on a high note, and that high note is thank God for Title IX and what it's done for American rowing on the colleges, in the high schools. I mean, the growth that we've seen has been absolutely incredible. I turn it over to the younger coaches as to where we can go in the future to keep things going and keep our sport progressing, because we all know what it can do to a young athlete, and building that young athlete into a really great citizen and somebody that's self-assured and can go out and kick ass, take names, and get the jobs that they want to get, you know. So, you know, thank you, Title IX. Thanks for all of it that it's done for all of us here in our sport. So with that, Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, I would just reiterate your words, and a big thank you to Jen and to Wendy, Carol and Steve, and thank you to Jim for facilitating, and always his plethora of wisdom. It's just never ending. So we will post this recording on our YouTube page, and I will send it to you in a direct email so you can share it with others if you'd like. And I hope you'll join us for our next story hour. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the ecology of the Schuylkill River. We have
good luck with that one.
We have it is very important, our stewardship efforts at the HOSR and in our community. So we even, you know, so much that we coined a slogan, "Love where you row." So what better way to further our stewardship but by educating folks about the river and the river that brings them so much joy. But I think even just out of this conversation, some, you know, additional topics, and, you know, I think coastal rowing being one of them, seeing that talked about in the future. So I thank you all for dedicating your time with us this evening. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out with thoughts or ideas for story hours, and wish you all very healthy and happy spring, and good night.
Good night.
Congratulations on your retirement, Carol.
Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye
Good
bye.
night, everybody.
Jen Lesson.